that grid that's over the top of the world. It's very significant. This very aggressive looking symbol underneath it. Anybody recognize that symbol? The World Bank. The World Bank. And a book that I would highly recommend to you. By the way, I don't usually bring so much of my research material, but with this particular subject, so many people think that this is just fantasy. I have to bring some material so that if you want, later on, you can come and have a look for yourselves. But this is a book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman by a guy called John Perkins, who spent many years working for the World Bank or for subsidiaries of the World Bank. And his job was to go into developing nations and persuade the governments to buy into massive credit plans, basically to bring that developing nation government into hock. Because just like on the microcosm, once you've got an individual in serious debt, basically you've got them under control. And the same thing with the macrocosm. If you can get a nation into serious debt, then you basically have them where you want them. And it shouldn't come as any great surprise to you that there's a very common denominator between all the countries that are classified as the axis of evil. This Bush term. And it's the countries like Cuba, North Korea, Iran, recently Russia. Anybody wondered why Russia has been demonized in the media, basically, for the last 6 months? Well, all of these countries, Venezuela, of course, and an increasing number of Latin American countries, as Venezuela and Chavez starts to find ways to help these guys out of their debt to the World Bank. These guys, all of these countries that are part of the axis of evil, are free of debt. And Russia paid off its last installment for all the billions that it borrowed after the collapse of the Soviet bloc back in 1990. So Putin had actually done an amazing job by appointing the 7 ugly sisters, the 7 oligarchs, to manage the industrial recovery. Of course, some of those oligarchs got a little bit too carried away and just wanted a bit too much power, and that's why, Putin has a bit of a problem with 1 or 2 of them. But his strategy was absolutely sound, because what he did was he identified the best guys in the country to take their particular industries and bring them, back up to full speed, and obviously enable Russia to become self-sufficient. And Russia is in exactly that position right now. The World Bank has a couple of henchmen to carry out its will, and that is the World Trade Organization, which has been around since 1995, and the World Health Organization. Now, these 2 organizations are complete misnomers, because let me assure you that the World Trade Organization has nothing really to do with world trade, and the World Health Organization definitely has nothing to do with health. But basically, any country that is signed up to membership of the World Trade Organization is effectively under the auspices of the UN. So anything that the World Trade Organization deems to be law, the member countries have to abide by. And I'll give you one example that you won't be aware of. The World Trade Organization have deemed it quite legitimate for the US to export its hormone-impregnated beef. And it sees no reason why any nation, certainly any member nation, should reject the importation of contaminated beef, i.e. contaminated with the growth hormone. The EU at the moment refuses to import the American beef. So the EU has to pay a fine to the World Trade Organization of 150 million euros a year, because we don't want their contaminated beef. And that fine will increase as the EU continues to reject it. Then the fine increases until they can, make the pip squeak. And in the end, what they expect you to do is go, okay, we take it. Now, who's going to eat it? Well, but you won't know, because a big part of Codex is to remove the labelling on foods, as we shall see. Now, the EU, a lot of people are under the misapprehension or misimpression that the EU is a democratic organisation. Let me categorically assure you it's not. First of all, we could get into the debate about whether you can actually mention the 2 phrases, democracy and a 3-line whip, in the same breath. A 3-line whip is not democracy. And that's exactly what we have here. But the EU is even worse. When you elect your MEP, it basically is about as effective as electing your shop steward if you're a member of the trade union. Just as your shop steward, you're electing to represent you to the management, but the shop steward has absolutely, well, not in this country anyway, in Germany and France it's slightly different, but the shop steward has no role in terms of determining the strategy or the direction of the company. And this is exactly the case with the MEPs. They are a consultative body. Nothing more, nothing less. They are a consultative body. The real power lies with the trade commissioners. And the most powerful trade commissioner, the most powerful commissioner of the EU is the trade commissioner, and of course you know who that is. You know, the most honest British politician. Yeah, I mean, how many times did this guy get bounced out of the cabinet? It was at least twice, and I think he might have got out a third time before he got bounced. But this is the guy with the power to determine what the EU does and doesn't participate in with the World Trade Organization. And needless to say, of course, you know, we're going down. He's taking the EU down that track. And the EU doesn't have a president yet, but in the Constitution, you know, it does call for a president, which also will be not elected, it will be appointed. And you know who's been promised the presidency? Why do you think he has to convert to Catholicism? There's no way a Protestant can be president of the EU. The EU is a Catholic entity. It's not called the Club of Rome for nothing. So Tony, to become EU president, has to convert to Catholicism. There he is, just in case you've forgotten what he looked like. And he's out of the country. What is he, out in the Middle East now? You know, peace minister or whatever the title they call him. You know, it's like putting King Herod in charge of the kindergarten. At least there's one good thing about it: nobody trusts him. And Gordon Brown, of course, just desperately wanted him out of the country. Right now, I think he probably desperately wants him back in, but at the time, he didn't want to be second guessed by Tony. So he wanted him as far away as possible. But I have this picture, which I think is a far better view of Tony, and one which I think I hope to live to see one day. And there's no question, this guy's a war criminal of the first order. I mean, you know, the whole team of them. Alistair Campbell, I mean, there's another war criminal. You know, Alistair Campbell very definitely has the blood of David Kelly on his hands, one way or another. And Tony, of course, I mean, just lied through the whole of his tenure. So, what we have is the Soviet state of Great Britain. I mean, you may or may not be aware, but Jackie Smith, I mean, there's not a statesman in this current government at all. It is remarkable. But Jackie Smith, within 1 week of being appointed Home Secretary, signed a piece of legislation that gave access to more non-government agencies to the personal lives of everybody in this country than the KGB ever had at the height of the Soviet Empire. And by the way, I mean, let me tell you that the loss of these discs may actually be good news. It may be good news. I know this sounds really perverse, but you know, the ID cards, the biometric ID cards were coming down the track so fast that the loss of these discs has proven that basically these guys cannot be trusted with basic data. So don't look on this as totally negative. Somebody may be doing us a big favour here. I mean, the media are putting out, you see, this is the thing, the media are telling everybody, the media are saying, you know, we were promised a referendum, but you're not going to give us one. And what the media will do, and you won't hear Brown actually mention this subject, because what the media will do is they will push this and push this and push this. And when there is no reaction from the public, then Brown will just take it as a mandate to sign us into the EU, and that'll be it, done and dusted. And we may have seen the last elections where it's possible to include in your manifesto any nationalistic policy. Because under the EU Constitution, it will be illegal for any political party to campaign or have within its manifesto any nationalistic ambitions. Which of course effectively, you know, overnight makes the Welsh nationalists, the Scottish nationalists, the BNP, some might argue that's not a bad thing, but it will make any party that campaigns on the basis of nationalism effectively illegal.